I have an exuberant passion for a particular foodstuff that some people find utterly revolting. But that's how it is. What gives some people pain can give the rest of us exquisite pleasure. And I have everything to feed my late night need in this black box.
Hey, so I wanted to come in and do a video called Confessions of a Book Slut. I saw a video similar to this one on Shawn the Book Maniac's channel, so I thought I would make it into a tag because the title's just so fun. So I've got, 6 questions, and then I'm going to go through like a book-related thing for each one. So, number 1, ORGY. Do you read polyamorously or monogamously? I'm unashamedly a polyamorous reader. I normally have about 3 books on the go. So normally I tend to read like a novel, poetry, and maybe a piece of non-fiction on the side. But it does depend what I'm doing. Like if I'm working full time, I might just read one novel and a bit of poetry, or rotate it with non-fiction a bit. Or if I'm studying like a fiction course, I'll probably read poetry and non-fiction alongside fiction I'm reading for the course. Or if I'm doing a fiction course, I might do like just a novel that I want to read myself for pleasure that's not uni related. So at the moment, for example, I've finished Persuasion and I'm reading this as a reread for pleasure. And I'm also reading some poetry at the same time. I don't really normally read more than 2 novels at one time because I think if I read more, I'd find it a bit too distracting reading them all at the same time. But generally, I find reading several books at once helps me not get bored from any of the books I am reading. And I also like reading poetry because, like, when I'm reading poetry, fiction and non-fiction, they're all different forms, so they're all enjoyable in their own different ways. So I'm less likely to find a poem boring, and it stops me reading poetry. Like if I'm reading a poetry collection, I might like one poem, spend a lot of time reading that one, then not like the other one, and then start rushing on and rushing through the poems when I should be taking my time with them. So I find if I start rushing through a poetry collection, I can just stop and go back to reading a novel or something where I can read more leisurely, supposedly. So yeah, at the moment I'm reading quite a few poetry collections, because with poetry collections, particularly if I'm writing poetry, I like to dip into poems, because I find that if I just read one collection at once, I end up doing the thing where I find a poem that I'm not that interested in, and then before I know it, I'm like, I've read 5 poems and I barely actually even read them, I just skimmed over them. So I find reading several at once helps keep me on my toes. So yeah, at the moment I'm reading these. I'm also reading this, which has a disgusting coffee stain because I'm a repulsive reader, which my friend on my uni course sold me. This is her first zine. It's kind of like a mini pamphlet that people self-publish. So she made her own, but I'm like, the quality of them is so good. Like, I'm so jealous. So yeah, I'm reading this at the moment. I'm really loving it. Okay, so next question. 2, safe sex. A book you are going to read cautiously. So I have chosen The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. I'm really excited to read this, and it came in one of these really interesting case folders. I'm not sure what you call it. But yeah, I wanted a nice edition because I want to really enjoy it. And it's red for sin, just like my gown. I'm really excited to read this. Don't know that much going into it, but a lot of the writers I like admire Dostoevsky, so I'm hoping I will admire him too. The only strange thing is that this one has pictures in. I'm not sure if they normally have pictures in, or if that's just something peculiar to this edition, but either way I'm excited for it. And it is in really good condition, so can't wait to read this cautiously. Okay, next. Blow Your Back Out. A book with sex in that you loved. So for this, I chose Alan Hollinghurst's The Line of Beauty. I love the way Alan Hollinghurst writes about sex. In the Swimming Pool Library, he writes about sex a lot, but he does like politicize sex a lot. So I think that would put a lot of people off sex. But I think the way he just writes about sex in a sensual way is also really, really good, especially gay sex. So in The Line of Beauty, this is like kind of a filthy book. It's all about debauchery in the 80s in Britain. And I remember in third year of uni, I read this for a module on neoliberalism in like the Thatcher era of Britain. And I remember in third year, like the English Lit Society were doing like a bookstall where people sell books they've done for modules on to people who are going to do the module next year. And I remember just sitting, minding the stall because I agreed to help out to have something to do. And I remember I was reading this at the time, and I remember reading it and getting aroused. So, yes, love this book. Next, for Commitmentphobe, a book you did not finish, Persuasion, which I was really enjoying. It was getting quite slow and similar with, was it Emma that I put down after about 30 pages? It was just kind of hard to get into, and I guess I'm in a bit of a slump at the moment. But then I read like 30 pages of this just really easily, so who knows? It might just be that Austen isn't my favourite. But Pride and Prejudice by Austen is one of my favourite books, so I love Pride and Prejudice, but that was the first book I ever read by Austen, and I didn't even know anything about Pride and Prejudice going into it because I read it when I was 16 on holiday. And I didn't really know anything about this as well, which was exciting. But I think with their books, they're always like the same themes, and they kind of just feel like a reshuffling of different characters. So Anne Elliot as a heroine was interesting, but I was like, I've read like 2/3 of it now, and I gave up on like page 191, and I think it's only like 260 pages, so it's not even that long. But I like the writing, the characters are okay, but I was like, I know it's marriage, and I know someone's going to end up marrying someone else, and someone's going to end up being, a disappointing character when everyone thought they were great and they're not, like in Pride and Prejudice. So I was just getting vibes that it's basically kind of just like a slightly less interesting version of Pride and Prejudice. So I ended up, by page 191, I was like, this is getting really boring now. There's not even any point skimming it because her sentences just don't work that way, I don't think. So I just looked up the rest of the plot on Wikipedia and was like, I'm glad I did put it down because based on the plot summary, it wouldn't have shocked me. I would have just been like, oh, similar to Pride and Prejudice. So, yeah, sorry that I'm a commitment phobe to Jane Austen, but, right, next. 5. Onenightstand. An author you've only read one book from and want to read more of. So for this, I've only read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which is also one of my favourite books. I want to read Jamaica's Inn by her, and I want to read Frenchman's Creek by her, but I don't have any of those yet, so I'm just going to say that I want to read this by her, The Birds, which is a short story collection. And 6, the last one, Nasty Surprise. Something shameful or taboo that you find out about a writer or a book. So for this, I've chosen this Dylan Thomas biography, which looks really old. I guess it is quite old. I got this from Oxfam, but I found out that, this is only alleged because it's in a biography, but he did leave a pretty reckless life anyway, Dylan Thomas. But there's this page. I think he's only like in his early 20s here. But apparently the biographer was suggesting that, he had some homosexual fling with this man. But, they didn't make out like he was bisexual. They just made out like, he probably just did it as an artistic endeavour to experience what it was like. But I was like, oh, Dylan. And I was like, look, Dylan Thomas isn't that hot. But look at this guy. Oh, like, fuck. So, yeah, that was something a bit surprising that I found out about Dylan Thomas, because I just thought he was a kind of drunk, pig. as a man, not as a poet. Yes, that would be a nasty surprise, I find out, about Dylan Thomas. So yes, if you want to do this tag, feel free. I'm not going to tag anyone because, I mean, just the questions might be a bit risque for some channels. But I hope you've enjoyed this tag, and like I said, if you feel like doing a video in response, please do. Alright, bye.
Slut, 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 slut.